Welcome to The Sober Unicorn. We are a gay-hosted, all-inclusive podcast about sobriety and addiction recovery for the LGBT plus community and all of our allies. I am your host, Holden, and thank you for joining us today. All right, well, hello, everybody. It's Holden back here again with The Sober Unicorn. I hope everybody's doing absolutely incredible. Of course, if you're not, you can always reach out to me or any of the guests here on the platform that have shared their social medias. I bet any of us would be happy to talk to you about whatever you're going through. Today, we have a guest that reached out to us via email. He wanted to come on and share his story and some stuff that he works with. He works closely with the LGBTQ community and recovery and stuff like that. So everybody welcome Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hi everyone. Hi Holden.
How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good. So, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, like who you are, and give everybody a little bit about like your recovery journey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, one of the reasons I think I even put this in my email when I reached out to you is I love the title, The Sober Unicorn, because a little bit about my story is I used to work at a bar. I bartended for a popular gay bar, and I live in California, Los Angeles. So I worked at a popular gay bar in West Hollywood for 11 years. And when I started working, I drank, I used drugs, and then about halfway, I worked there for 11 years. And so about maybe, I don't know, 4 years, I stopped using drugs and alcohol. And so I was sober while working at this really popular, busy nightclub. And sometimes guests would come up to me and, want to buy me a drink or like a shot. And when I would say like, oh, I don't drink, or, I'm sober. I'll never forget one of the guests, the customers, when I said that, he's like, "You're sober?" Finding a sober person at a gay bar is like finding a unicorn.
Mm-hmm.
And that always just struck me. And so when I saw the name of your podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to talk to him. So.
And it's great having people reach out to me that want to guest on that have like just found me organically. And they're like, okay, now I want to hop on too. So the thing is, you work closely with the LGBT community.
Do. Yeah, I specialize. I specialize in working with I'm an LGBTQ affirming therapist. That's what I went to school for, and it's a specialization. And I primarily specialize in working with gay men specifically. And that's one of also the reasons I wanted to share my story and just talk to folks who listen to your podcast or who might come across is just around sobriety and recovery. And I work with a lot of gay men specifically, and there's sort of themes that I find in the work that I do. And a lot of the clients that I work with are interested in sobriety, or maybe they're struggling with getting sober. And so whether it's alcohol, whether it's substance like drugs, crystal meth is a big one that I work with a lot of clients around. And I think too, because I have a lot to say about this subject, because I feel like one of the big things that I find with my clients is they suffer with shame and silence, because there's this because of all the work that we want to do publicly as around advocacy and equality and having the same rights, which is very important. A lot of us don't want to talk about our struggles. And so we kind of want to subconsciously project out to the world, accept us, see us, hear our stories. And at the same time, a lot of us are still struggling with shame around our identities, around sexuality. A lot of my clients, gay men who, whether they're in their 20s, 30s, my oldest client is 71 years old. They've not ever really fully experienced sober sex. They've not been entirely sober and also had sex. And so I think it's a really important conversation to allow folks to have publicly.
I know sober sex, it took me a minute. Like once I got clean, because a lot of my drug abuse was around chem sex, which meth sex and everything. So it took a long time to like feel comfortable with myself sexually again, because of course, when you're on meth, you are willing to put yourself out there entirely. Rejection doesn't matter anymore. Because
Right.
you're like, oh, if he rejects me, the next five won't. Um, but now when you're sober minded, rejection hits you a little differently,
Mm,
and you kind of aren't willing to put, like, I wasn't willing to put myself out there like that
yeah.
for a long time. And just recently have I met somebody that is aware of my past, that accepts it, that sexually is open, and we've been able to like navigate the
Mm.
sober sex, and finally I've been able to start enjoying sex again with other people, and in the sober world. So when you got your like degree, were you able to accomplish that because you were sober, or were you working on that pre-sobriety?
Yeah, no, I've been sober now for 8 years. For me working at a bar, and this is one of the things I love talking about too, is really helping people understand their substance use. Like that's like the first sort of step that I often, with even working with my clients or friends who call me, who are maybe sober curious and are interested, is really helping them understand. And so for me, I worked at a bar. I came out of the closet. I sort of always equated, in my experience, I kind of equated partying and drugs and drinking with a lot of my friends coming out, going to the club, that kind of thing. That's where we socialized, and so they kind of went hand in hand. And then when I started working at a gay bar, I realized like, oh, this is kind of just what we do. And I sort of thought that I'm more personable when I'm drunk, or I'm more personable when I'm using drugs, cocaine, that kind of
Hmm.
thing. And so I'm more, I'm like more fun. And that was the story that I told myself. And so for me, it was understanding my use,
Hmm.
understanding alcohol, understanding cocaine for myself. And I remember when I first got sober, I didn't want to tell anyone because I didn't want them to judge me. I didn't want them to like make fun of me, really, to be honest. And so I chose to sort of, like, as an experiment, just to do it on my own,
Hmm.
because I wanted to understand, like, is that really true? Like, am I really not fun, like, without being drunk, or being on drugs? And so once I was able to understand why I was using and what my relationship was with the substances, it was like a friend. It was like a trusted, like, friend that I had. But then when I started to see, like, oh, well, this friend actually is affecting my other relationships, it's maybe it's not that good of a friend. um, and so then when I sort of understood that, and the story I was telling myself, which is that, I'm more fun, I'm more personable, I'm going to get better tips. And so when I stopped and I realized, like, I'm still fun, I'm still personable, I got the same amount of tips, I realized that that story wasn't true. There were a lot of holes in that story. And
Hmm.
so for me, it just completely changed my life. And I found, so much, like, on the other side of using I mean, so much time and energy was put into, drugs and alcohol. Like, being hungover was the absolute worst. I mean, that's really like, to know that I don't ever have to be hungover again is like one of the biggest gifts.
And I know, I mean, come for me, my main DSU is meth. So once you're doing that and you come down, you have days of recuperation.
It's horrible.
You're losing days of time that could be better spent doing other things. So you talked about shame,
Yes.
from within ourselves. So do you find that with your clients or yourself that the shame is because of their parents
Mm.
or the straight society, or do you think the shame is about themselves, brought on by their own community?
That's a really good question. I think each person's, I look at each person kind of as a unique experience, and also there are sort of patterns or similar experiences, and so it's kind of both. And I think that a lot of my clients that I work with, again, going back to 20s, 30s, 40s, my oldest client is 71. They share similar experiences, from their childhood, about what it meant to be gay. A lot of them have the same sort of religious trauma experiences, or the shameful messages that they heard about themselves. One of my clients I'll never forget. I think it's one of these things that I feel honored to be able to do this work, because I feel like I'm bearing witness to someone's like story, their life, their experience. And one of my clients shared that there was never room for him to be gay when he was younger. And I think about that from a psychological perspective, like our psyches. Like I knew that I was gay when I was 6. A lot of my clients share a similar, age range, like maybe 6, 7, years old. And when I share that with people, like when I'm talking or giving a talk or something, and they'll say, like, "Well, how did you know you were gay?" And the thing of it is like we put our adult constructs of gender and sexuality onto, we like, when I say that, we're putting our adult constructs of what we know as an adult about sexuality. At 6 years old, I didn't know what being gay meant. I couldn't tell you what I know now as an adult, but what I did know as a child is that there was something about me that I was starting to tune into. I was starting to notice differences. I was starting to maybe feel crushes and feel my feelings, and I noticed that there was a difference in me around from what a lot of the messages that I sort of heard or saw with friends. And it's the same thing with my clients. And so thinking about it, going back to my client who shared there was never room for him to be gay, from a psyche's perspective, there's not space, there's never room for him to be gay. That does something to the psyche. That and then he grew up sort of internalizing these messages that he can't be himself, he can't show who he is. And so when he's developing, like we all do, maybe having an erection, maybe going through hormones, like all of those things that we experience, that all had to be done in private. That all had to be done in secret. So what he started to do is go to parks and, hook up with strangers, and as a teenager. And so that takes a toll. And so going back to your point is, where do those messages come from? They can come from, I call them messages from the playground. The subconscious beliefs that we all pick up from our childhood. The playground is the mind, our consciousness, and the messages are society's beliefs. And so going back to your point is that, a lot of us who grew up with shame or experience shame, no matter if we're out of the closet, we're in a relationship, some of those, they're kind of like splinters. They kind of, some of them are still inside. And so then we come out of the closet and we go to the club or we have friends, and we're not aware of our own unconscious feelings about being gay. And so then we project that onto others.
I can see that. I mean, especially going to church. I mean, I feel many gay people that I've spoke to have major trauma from the church. Or I know back in my time, I was born in the 90s. It was Will and Grace was on TV. And so you hear just in the background parents, siblings talking badly about these individuals on TV, which you internalize that. And I mean, then there's some people that don't fit into the gay norm that
Right.
when they try to even enter that society,
yes,
then they feel shame about even being gay because they're like, well, I don't fit in that stereotype that gay people are. So you talked about in the email, you compared a church to a gay bar.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate?
Sure. Yeah. That's one of the things that I often talk about is like, what I observed, and again, 11 years working there. Sundays in Los Angeles they call them Sunday Fun Day. It's like, I don't know if where listeners are listening in from, but West Hollywood Sunday Fun Day, Sunday brunch is like a big day. And what I started to observe after 11 years of working on Sunday is like, what people do at a bar and what people do at church are really ultimately the same thing. They're seeking a connection with something beyond the realm of this world. It's just that one source is sustainable and one isn't, meaning that oftentimes drugs, alcohol isn't sustainable, especially if it's overused and misused. And so what I started to see is like, what when you go to church, they're people, community, you're having an experience of connection. Maybe there's music involved, there's inspiration, it's fun. um, that also happens at a gay bar on Sundays. And so what I started to see is like a lot of people, in my experience, I had religious trauma. I mean, I don't think that you can grow up in the United States and not, to some degree, even if you go to an affirming church now. I mean, there are more affirming churches. I think
Mhm.
collectively, like to your point, children are sponges, they absorb everything. And so what are they unconsciously absorbing? And so to sort of contend with those messages that we've absorbed, finding reprieve at a bar on Sunday is like, no wonder, it's fun.
It is fun. Sunday fun day. I mean, I think I lived in LA for a long time. Well, for 3 years. I wouldn't say that's a long time, but Sundays was crazy. I mean, even here in Wilton Manors, that's
Mm.
very known within the gay culture. And it seems that, like, I always joke around how the gay community is sponsored by Absolute Vodka.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
it's it's insane on how you can't even enter a gay event, gay party, or gay really anything without alcohol being involved, and at least looking around and seeing coked out people, methed out people. I mean, I understand that happens in straight society too, but as you said, with shame coming from our sexuality because of childhood trauma, I think it's amplified within our
Oh,
community. I
100%.
mean, I many of my friends, we'd go out. I hang out with mostly straight people. And when I was drinking, they would have one or two drinks, and here I'm on like my ninth or 10th shot. Part
Hmm.
of that, yes, of course, is alcoholism, but
Yeah,
the other part is like gay people are always kind of known to be extra, the life of the party. So it's kind of like this weird expectation of us too to go above and beyond the
yeah,
norm. Um, so I find that, yeah, gay people, when it comes to alcohol or drugs, it's they always have to take it to that next level.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, you said a lot of really, really like wonderful things. And what I heard too is you said, gay people like being extra, life of the party. I think about that from the perspective like a defense mechanism. Like if I can be the life of the party, if I can be really fun and funny, then that sort of takes away, going back to the sort of topic of shame, is that takes away from my own discomfort of feeling different or feeling shame. So then if I could just put on this sort of like funny, one of the things I'll never forget, I talk a lot, with people around like sarcasm and like how it's kind of, like watching shows, like even you mentioned Will and Grace, there's this sort of sarcastic kind of like snarky humor with between a lot of gay
Mhm.
people going to a gay bar. Is like there's a lot of sarcasm used. And I'll never forget, I was working with a therapist, and he told me one time that sarcasm, the root word, I think it's it's a Greek word. It means tearing of skin, like tearing of
Hmm.
flesh. And so it really comes from this like deep place where it's unconsciously like tearing someone down. And I think about
Mm.
that from the perspective of how we use humor oftentimes in the gay community to tear others down. And it's a defense mechanism. Not 100% across the board for everyone, but oftentimes I look at it from a defense mechanism.
I mean, I mean, look at RuPaul's Drag Race. You gonna read a bitch. I
Right.
mean, it's you're
Right.
jokingly tearing somebody down.
Yeah.
Yes, it's all about laughter and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, if you hear it enough, that does take away a piece of somebody from themselves.
Yeah.
So,
Because if I don't want to feel my own
mhm.
pain and discomfort unconscious that still exists inside, it's too much for me to bear. So I'm gonna give that to someone else.
Exactly, exactly. So you write a blog. So is your blog around sobriety, or is it around your kind of more professional life?
Both. I write. I write a blog for Psychology Today, and that's more like around like, I mean, like like people in the mental health world, to help them understand their LGBTQ clients. It's called LGBTQ affirming psychology. And then I also write about, I write for, I don't write for, but I publish a lot of articles on this website called Elephant Journal, which I love so much because it's all about the mindful life. So I talk a lot about sobriety, spirituality, recovery. I don't know if when you got sober, if you use the 12 steps, but one of the things I like a lot about, in the term recovery is like, what are we recovering? We're recovering ourselves. And so in my own experience, when I got sober, I didn't get sober through the 12 steps, but I did get sober through my own spiritual journey, my own spiritual practice. Having to resolve my relationship with a higher power, that was so much a part of my own journey of, coming into myself, having to reconcile, like, do I still believe is the God that I understood or grew up with was this sort of persecutory older man on the clouds judging me. And I really had to I do a lot of work around, what is my notion of a higher power? Like, what do I believe about where do I locate myself in this bigger picture of life?
Yeah, I mean, I got clean through the 12 steps. But the thing is, I've always stated on the podcast that there's multiple avenues to get clean or sober,
Yeah,
whatever term you want to use.
for sure.
And there's no right or wrong as long as you get the end goal is the same. And that's why I bring on guests from all different. I've had Matt Recovery on here, CBT, multiple avenues, because there's no right or wrong, as we're all here for the same goal. And that's why I like the term recovery, because it's recovery to just recover yourself, as you
Recover
said,
yourself. Yeah.
because it's all about an internal, I know, like an internal battle. I know when I wrote my book, that hands down was like the most therapeutic thing I ever went through. Like, for me, it was more therapeutic than the 12 steps could ever be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because things we hold in and traumas that we hold in, it was like putting it out there.
Yeah.
And writing it down and forgiving people of the past and so on and so forth was super forgiving. And
Yeah.
so I know you wrote a book.
I
as
did.
Well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And just to kind of touch on something that you said, and I speaking of my book, like one of the chapters of my book, I'm big on words. Words are so important, and they speak to our unconscious beliefs. And one of the words that you used, and this speaks to kind of I think the 12-step model I hear a lot, or it just even in kind of maybe like treatment, in general, is like you said, you got clean through the 12 steps. And even that word clean sort of implies that you were dirty when using drugs. And I think that it's important for me at least, to recognize, especially when it comes to shame. Shame is one of those things where like we feel dirty, we feel like not worthy. And I feel like that's important to like, you're like clean, dirty, like just I mean, what I'm saying? And so I think that that's important to really underscore that you weren't dirty and now you're clean. Like you're Holden, you're who you are. And that, you were using drugs, I imagine, if we were, through your own journey, is like you were using for a reason. Like you talked about chemsex. Like a lot of my clients, gay male clients, like they didn't date in high school. They weren't out. They didn't go to prom. They're, a dance. They didn't have they didn't let themselves like openly show like their crush. And they never knew what, like, no one talked to them about sex. No one talked to them about their bodies. No one talked to them about how do you have anal sex? I remember when I was my first male boyfriend, I came out of the closet, I was 24 years old. I literally had to Google, like, I didn't even know how to how do I have sex? Like, how do I, I didn't even know like what to do. Like my boyfriend was the one who told me what I needed to do to sort of like prepare. And like, imagine, and so no wonder you grow up as an adult and you have some discomfort around intimacy with another
Mm-hmm.
person is very vulnerable. You know, and so if there's a drug, especially crystal meth, I mean, meth is literally a drug that washes away the shame.
And what's funny to talk about the term clean, it's very important for people to understand. Just because you're on drugs doesn't mean you're dirty.
Yes.
Just because, like HIV, if you're on any dating
Right.
app as a gay male, you're like, oh, are you clean? Like
Right.
that refers to anybody that has suffers from HIV or any other STD is a dirty person, and that is not true.
Right.
Anytime anybody in the app has ever been like, "Are you clean?" Yeah, I took a
Yes.
shower today. I
Yeah.
would make them like rephrase it before I would
Yes.
answer accurately. And I honestly, because I work through NA, I've never really understood the clean to sober term. I think honestly, it's the fact that you can piss clean. I think that's what it refers to, but I've never really understood or that your bloodstream is clean from drugs. But so it doesn't mean that you're a dirty individual by any means. So, but yes, I always interchange sober, clean. At the end of the day, I use the word sober a lot because that's more societal
Mm-hmm.
recognizes it a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And then I say the word clean a lot because I worked at NA literature and that's what
Yeah.
it tells me to do.
I totally get it. I totally get it. And I totally understand. And I think that for people who are listening who maybe aren't aware, you know, just to like when I hear people talk about themselves, like I'm just big on words and like I'm curious, like to your psyche, like saying that over and over again, you know, or hearing that over and over again just sort of implies like, oh, others who aren't
Hmm.
in this program maybe are dirty or, you know, something. So I'm just very like mindful of words and language, because I do think it's something that we take in.
No, of course. And I think bringing the whole thing back to shame in your
Yes.
book is the thing is in order to get rid of shame growing up gay, we need to make sure we're growing up in a comfortable environment
Yes.
and an accepting environment, an environment that is willing to talk, where we come out to our parents and our parents are able to have the birds and bees talk with us about gay sex
Yeah.
because it's not happening in the schools.
No.
So it needs to happen at home, and it
Right.
doesn't need to happen on Google.com and
Oh my gosh, no.
or it doesn't need to happen on Grinder with a 40-year-old man when you're 16, 17 years old.
Yes. Yeah.
So I mean, in your book kind of talks about that. It's about raising LGBT kids.
Yeah.
So I mean, if anybody is interested in like picking up your book, what can they expect to see inside the book?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, my book, it's about, well, it's called Raising LGBTQ Allies. And one of the things that I often talk to about, like even with parents or caregivers, is that, you know, we live in a heteronormative society unconsciously. And so there's this sort of kind of not even like, it's not even conscious, but we just kind of raise kids, or we like sort of, until they come out, we sort of think that maybe they're heterosexual because that's kind of the majority or the default. And so my hope with my book is to be proactive. You know, there's this sort of, maybe you're familiar with this like in treatment even, but from a mental health perspective, prevention is a much more effective intervention than treatment. And so if we could prevent something before we have to treat it. And so my book is, I'm hoping to prevent a lot of the things that you experience, that I experienced, that a lot of my clients experience, to prevent those. And so to have proactive conversations, you know, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I think that, you know, children, going back to what I said earlier, they're sponges, they absorb everything, and they're not so great at interpretation. And so a lot of the things that even my clients, like, you know, when I explore their childhood or their memories, you know, and I ask them like, well, how did you know that? Or how did you, you know, and it's sort of what they interpreted. And so if we can, as parents, caregivers, you know, the book really was born from my own experience of having conversations with my nieces and nephews, with my family, and helping my family understand. I come from a big Italian family. And so I have like 20 cousins who are married. So that's double, 40 cousins plus children. They all have kids. Most of them have kids. And so there are a lot of young people in my family. And so my hope really with my book was I sort of was wanting them to consider that there are right now in our family LGBTQ kids. And if we're not considering that as a possibility, then we're contributing to the experience that I had, which is I didn't, kind of like my client said, there was no space for me to be gay when I was younger.
Yeah, which makes us closeted, and then
yes,
I mean it's kind of it's a domino effect into adult.
Domino effect.
Same thing, like we had no space for LGBTQ back in the day when Stonewall, and I mean those were tiny spaces, but now we have huge platforms available to us. So we need to make sure we develop the platforms for us as adults, but what about the LGBT kids?
Right.
So we need to make sure that we open those doors that we've had and experienced through. Make sure we open it up so they have their own platform and are able to be accepted and be open at a younger age, so they don't have to fight so much internally with themselves.
Yeah, because we grow up. Not only are we products of our family and our family's family and kind of generation, but we're products of our environment, our neighborhood, our city, our country. And so there are layers to this. And so if we can sort of explore all of those and help create spaces where everyone can be themselves and feel seen. And a lot of my clients that I work with, and this is one of the things too with my book, is to help parents and caregivers attune to their children, to really allow them to become who they are and to facilitate a sort of space for them to expand and not feel like they need to hide, because then that's where the closet, in my opinion, is a hotbed for shame.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't have to be in the closet. The only reason we're in the closet is because we feel shameful of our sexuality.
Yeah.
I've always stated that I hope for a day that there's no coming out.
Yes.
That it's, you bring home the person that you're with and you say, Mom, Dad, this is my boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is. And then that's it. I don't understand why this whole coming out has became this major monumental thing. We should just be who we are, and whether it's a man, woman, doesn't really matter at this point. So I hope for that. So of course I'll link the book in the bio, but like, where are they able to find it if they want to look for it?
Yeah, thank you. Raising LGBTQ Allies. It's available wherever books are sold. Independent bookstores, bookshop.org is an independent bookseller, or Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, wherever books are sold. It just came out in Spanish a few months ago that I'm so excited about. So this is the English version, raising LGBTQ Allies, and then cute. This is the Spanish version.
I love the covers.
Yeah. Thank you. This is from an artist. And it's like a really. Yeah, so they got a artist to create. He's like a well-known artist, and so he drew this, and it's to represent like consciousness and like how we develop as children. Yeah, so I'm really excited.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Thank you again for listening to today's episode. Hit that follow button to be notified about new episodes every week. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us on Instagram at The Sober Unicorn Podcast or on our website at thesoberunicornpodcast.com. There you will find our episodes as well as our very own sober-owned shop featuring products from small businesses that are sober-owned. And remember everyone, don't be normal, be a unicorn, but better yet, be a sober unicorn.